I think that everyone understands by now that Luffy is dying. Oda's been foreshadowing this all the way back to Enies Lobby. And I also think that most people know by now that Luffy is following down the very same path as Gold D. Roger. He's going to acquire an incurable disease. Although Luffy is going to do it in a matter of a few years, where at least Roger made it to his 50s. So I wanted to make this video while it's fresh on my mind. I think I know exactly what Roger's incurable disease was and what Luffy's will be. I'm going to lay out what you probably already know in a way that you haven't heard before. So buckle up and let's begin. Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So to begin, I think that we should run down what we know and why pretty much everybody thinks that Luffy is going to get sick and why he will have almost no lifespan left. We learn from Lucci that Gear 2nd is killing him. I'm going to read this out loud because I think that it's important for later in the video. He says you pump your legs and speed up your blood flow. The blood pressure would rupture a normal person's heart. You can take it because your organs and blood vessels, every part of you is rubber. But being a rubber man may not be enough. Lucci continues, indeed, your physical abilities go through the roof, but your physical strength can't keep up with the intensity. That's not very smart. You're chipping away at your life. Now there's some debate as to whether Gear 2nd is still killing Luffy. It may not be. Luffy may be physically strong enough now, but this is a theme with all of Luffy's new techniques, and also simply how he fights. In Impel Down in Marineford, Ivankov told us that their hormones would shorten Luffy's lifespan. And he did it twice. And the same logic that Lucci gave us about Gear 2nd can be applied to Gear 4th. Luffy is pushing the limits of what his rubber body can do. I honestly think that Luffy keeps himself together in Gear 4th using Haki. That's why Gear 4th requires Haki and Gear 2nd does not. He has to literally will his body to not explode. And even as he may be growing strong enough to better handle Gear 4th, we now have Gear 5th. Whenever that ability runs out, Luffy appears as an old man. I don't think that to be a coincidence. And if it reminds you of anything, it should remind you of Hody Jones and the New Fishman Pirates. Like, the toll of Gear 5th is portrayed as a joke, but I really doubt that it is. When Hody Jones and his crew took the energy steroids, what happened to them? Well, they became much stronger, obviously, but importantly, their hair turned white, just like Nika. And after the effects were off, they all became old men. This didn't seem to be temporary, it seemed to be permanent. Like the steroids literally chopped off 50 years plus of their lives. But if we aren't talking about the fishmen and the steroids, we could also potentially be talking about Mink Sulong. The exact same thing is going on. They transform, and suddenly they are stronger and have white hair. As Jinbei tells us, if a mink cannot control their transformation, they can literally fight themselves to death in a single night. I take this to mean that they expend their entire lifespan. So it may not yet be officially stated in the story, but I think that Gear 5th takes a very heavy toll on Luffy, possibly more than everything else combined. So this just feels like something that everybody knows, but it's easy to forget. It is incredibly likely that Luffy dies again before the story ends. His body will fail him no different than Gold D. Roger. I feel like this is going to become a part of the backdrop of some of the last fights in the series. A sort of race against time. Maybe you can think about Whitebeard in Marineford, but this time it's Luffy. He will be the Yonko that is nursing the last bit of his health while trying to achieve his goals and protect his family. But yeah, I suppose there's potential for some other circumstances aside from this, like, for instance, if we got here in Elbaf some clues that Luffy has a sickness, then perhaps we have an arc after this where Chopper could potentially find a cure, so we head into the final battle or whatever that might look like, and Luffy is at full strength. But you guys know that I like the parallels. So if Marineford is the final battle of the pre-time skip and Luffy represents Whitebeard, you know, that's something that I like. Something I feel like Oda might do. But honestly, we're not really saying anything too crazy here. So let's get more specific. What will this illness be? And how does it make sense in world? Honestly, I have the impression that many people think that if Luffy does get an incurable disease, it will be something exotic. And quite frankly, exotic diseases have already been pretty substantial part of the story, and Oda has some things to choose from. Nami developed 5-day disease after getting bit by a prehistoric bug in Little Garden. Tree fever from Nolan and Kalgro's flashback. Amber-led sickness from Law's flashback. Boa Hancock's love sickness. So potentially some sort of exotic disease is on the table, but you shouldn't really use any of the ones that I listed here because all of these have cures, and we know them. And hell, disease and actual pirate history intersect quite a lot, so if Oda wants to be historically accurate, man, just give Luffy chlamydia. I can just read it in the panel right now. Oh no, Luffy has the clap. If the One Piece world hasn't developed antibiotics yet, chlamydia would be incurable. But all jokes aside, right, I really do think that this incurable disease that Roger had and that Luffy will have is literally heart disease. Like straight up Goku from Dragon Ball Z. We kind of discussed this a little bit before, but I think Gear 5th costs a substantial amount of Luffy's lifespan. And Gear 5th also turns Luffy old, at least for short periods of time. Guys, when people talk about dying of natural causes or dying of old age, in most cases, this means heart failure. The thing that breaks for most people first is your heart. Whether it is entirely true or not, there is a saying out there that you only get a certain number of heartbeats in your lifetime. This is called the rate of living theory. It is an actual theory based on the real-world observation that things with slower heart rates generally live longer, while things with faster heart rates tend to live shorter lifespans. But essentially the point is there is a relationship between lifespan and heart rate or metabolic rate. But I suppose without technical jargon or in layman's terms, right, the more that you use your heart, the quicker that it breaks. And if you rewatch Fishman Island, Hody Jones, whenever he eats the energy steroid, there's something like a painful heartbeat happening. I think that the drug is affecting his heart, and ultimately why he aged. So I hope that you understand by now why Goku came down with heart disease, and why it would make sense for Luffy and Roger to have done the same. But bear in mind, with this idea, we're not just talking about somebody who overuses or overworks their body intentionally. This could even relate to things like anxiety, stress, and fear, or anything which might naturally raise your heart rate. There is a distinct possibility that these things actively shorten your lifespan. But to bring this back to One Piece, I think that this concept is something that Oda has been foreshadowing for a very, very long time. Take love sickness as an example. Love sickness is something that doesn't have, I don't think, any real-world counterpart. It's something that Oda has literally created for the story of One Piece. And it is actually built around a disease of the heart. And if you want to focus on something instead that has already affected the Strats, you can look at 5-day disease, which Nami contracted. In chapter 139, Dr. Kreia literally tells us that this disease causes heart failure, then brain failure, then death. And I think that it's fitting to linger here on Drum Island just for a moment, because while Nami was suffering from a disease which was likely going to cause heart failure, you have Dr. Hiruluk. Like Roger, and like we're speculating about Luffy, Dr. Hiruluk had a quote-unquote incurable disease. And he tells us in a roundabout way that what his incurable disease was a serious heart problem. Dr. Hiruluk suffered from heart disease, which was incurable, supposedly. So I guess we're not going to skip over it while we're here. This is some of the beauty of Oda's storytelling, because he flips this localized disease, this condition of Dr. Hiruluk, to the entire country of Drum Island, and most probably the entire world. In kind of a silly way, Dr. Hiruluk tells us that this country is sick right now. Its people and its government. And the hearts of the people are sick, which is his entire inspiration for giving the country of Drum Island sakura blooms that cured his heart. Like I said earlier, there's an association between stress, anxiety, and things like heart attacks. When you get bad news, you feel your heart literally drop. Or perhaps if you're in love, you can feel your heart flutter. You aren't imagining it, something is actually happening. And I feel like this is what Dr. Hiruluk is talking about. He knows heart disease well and diagnosed the entire country. Ultimately, what cured him, at least for some period of time, is a place which brought his heart peace and calm. It's also probably not a coincidence that we saw Goldie Roger and Whitebeard hanging around in a place with a lot of sakura blossoms, and Roger also surpassed what his life expectancy was supposed to be. Roger found the same temporary cure as Dr. Hiruluk. peace and serenity. So when you're thinking about Chopper's dream in the future, I really hope that you're thinking about this, because it really is quite profound. Chopper is following in Dr. Hero's footsteps and wants to find and understand this cure. But this is less medical science in the vein of Dr. Kureha and more spiritual, which is why Dr. Hiruluk as a teacher matters, and why ultimately Chopper had two teachers, each with something very important to pass along to him, so that he can surpass them both. But yeah, if Dr. Hiruluk's disease of the heart being soothed by sakura blossoms and Goldie Roger literally having a scene with Whitebeard in the same sort of scenery doesn't convince you that Roger's incurable disease was literally heart disease, then I guess we have to take this back to Luffy. Rob Lucci, when explaining why Gear 2nd reduces Luffy's lifespan, specifically mentions the stress of the technique on his heart. We also speculated, at least I think, that Gear 5th reduces Luffy's lifespan more than anything else. So what is one of the highlighted things about Gear 5th? The Drums of Liberation, which is literally Luffy's heartbeat as Nika. I kind of think that you don't need me to tell you that that heartbeat is very irregular. Man's literally having heart palpitations, precursor to heart attack. I'm just saying. So at this point, I hope that we are on the same page. Goldie Roger's incurable disease was most probably heart disease, and if Luffy comes down with an incurable disease just the same as Roger, it is probably going to be the same thing. Straight up, I think that the cure for Luffy's heart at the end of the story, assuming that he survives, will literally be the discovery of the One Piece. How fitting would that be? Luffy will end up discovering a cure very similar to Dr. Hiruluk's, but most probably even more powerful. And it just kind of rolls off the tongue, right? The One Piece will heal not Drum Island's, but the entire world's heart, because the world is sick. After the Roger Pirates found the One Piece, Roger continued to live even without Crocus's help. I like the thought that finding the One Piece gave him a boost in vitality. Just one of those things that makes too much sense. I could probably end the theory right now, and I feel like a lot of you would be satisfied with that. But while we're here, let's take this to the next level. I explained some of this in a video recently, so I apologize for a little bit of repetitiveness, but I feel like it's interesting nonetheless. The end goal really, I think, is to explain how Luffy basically died, like his heartbeat stopped in Wano, but he came back to life. And why I think that Luffy might die again, perhaps several times over, yet he will still be able to get back up, and why that might make sense. But obviously up until this point in time, we've talked a lot about heart disease and heart failure, right? Like conditions of the body. But some of this doesn't really make a ton of sense, because you have life forms in the world of One Piece that are alive, even with dead bodies. Brook being the obvious one. He has no beating heart, but he is perfectly alive. So what, do we think that Brook holds the trump card to defeat heart illness entirely? The solution is actually really simple. If you don't want heart disease, just don't have a heart. Cue the Brook laugh. I think probably not. And obviously the same thing applies to Big Mom's homies. I want you guys to be patient with me for just a moment, while we explain some tedious technicalities. So the way that we explained this before is there's certain critical aspects to life. Like every normal life form has a body, has a soul, and has a shadow. But we essentially know that a living body is not required. And while we're here, I want to throw in a fourth thing which could potentially be a part of life that we didn't mention before because it wasn't relevant to, it's more relevant here. There could be an aspect of consciousness. Whether your consciousness is tied to your soul or if that's one and the same thing, I can't tell you that. But consciousness is also a thing, and it's brought up occasionally in the story. The smoking gun evidence for this comes from Kuma, because Vegapunk was able to extract most, maybe even all, of Kuma's consciousness. But he did not take Kuma's soul. It might also relate to things like memories and Pudding's devil fruit. So when you or I think about Brook in his soul form outside of his body, I don't think that you should entirely think of it as his soul form. It's his soul plus his consciousness. For one reason or another, the two things are combined, and Brook uses his mind to control his soul. Also, just note here that Brook is breaking another rule because he has a mind without a brain, so no brain disease either. So I just like the thought that there's a fourth element of life, consciousness, which potentially interacts with everything else. That is what allows you to control your soul in order to create haki. It's also what allows you to control your body in Seimei Kikan, or potentially control your own shadow. So if you just take this as truth for a moment, it makes you think about the soul a little bit differently. I like to say that haki, which is literally translated as willpower, is a power of the soul. But in this case, that statement is only partially true. Your soul really is just an energy source. So training haki is not training your soul, it's actually training your consciousness, which I feel like is just something that once you say out loud makes a lot of sense. It's a feat of the mind, which utilizes your soul. This also potentially opens the door that if you train your haki enough, therefore you train your consciousness enough, there are additional abilities that you could potentially unlock that might be related to what Brook is doing and why Brook is alive. So let's get to the point and bring this back to heart disease. Through Big Mom, we know for a fact that lifespan is synonymous with the soul. Big Mom has the soul fruit. When she takes soul from people, it's commonly referred to as lifespan. Essentially, your soul possesses the energy of your life, and there is some finite amount that decreases as time passes or decreases as energy is used. And through Trafalgar Law and his Opi Opi no Mi, we know where the soul resides within the body. A normal person's body. When Big Mom animates homies, right, they intrinsically possess some kind of personality that they didn't before, which tells you that soul and personality are related. Well, Law has an ability called the personality transplant surgery, where he was able to body swap people, which he used in Punk Hazard. When he used the technique, visually what happened was he switched people's hearts and forced them to trade places. Look, man, I'm not even gonna try to explain pseudo-biomechanics of what's going on here. All I can tell you is that Law switched people's hearts, and with it, I think that he switched their souls and their consciousness. All it really tells you is where these things are located in the body normally. I also like the thought that the mind follows the heart. Just seems like an Oda-ism to me. But the whole point of this is that if you were to die, for instance, of old age, that would mean that your soul has run out of lifespan. And it seems like Oda's world operates kind of like Death Note. The default type of death is heart attack, because that's where your soul lives, and the organ it is attached to. So for me, this explains Brook. Brook doesn't have a heart, so his soul must be attached to his body somewhere else. It could be his entire skeleton, it could be his skull, or it could straight up be his afro. But I do believe that it is possible for Brook to die of old age. I think that his soul has a finite amount of lifespan. So dying of old age for Brook looks differently than it would for everybody else. Let's just assume for a moment, for the shits and giggles of it, that Brook's soul is attached to his afro. Firstly, if you shave off his afro, he dies. Literally. For Brook, the afro has become a vital organ. But secondly, if he reaches old age, what you would probably see is hair failure, which is hilarious enough to potentially be true. And I think that this helps unlock the next part of this theory. There are two different ways that somebody could die. There is actually an important distinction between dying of old age or being killed. There's an expression of going too soon, and it accompanies the belief that somebody has died before their time. I think that this is an actual thing in One Piece. Your soul possesses your lifespan, the energy of your life that steadily trickles away. So if some kind of unfortunate accident happened, let's say you got hit by a bus, or murdered, or you're a baby, when you die, you haven't run out of lifespan. What's being killed is your body. And for most people, it is simply the truth that once your body dies, you die. And whatever remaining lifespan that your soul possessed is just lost. It's wasted. What I'm saying is that your body can die before your soul. But if you use Brook as an example, it kind of makes an argument for itself. We know that life can overcome a dead body with the right circumstances or abilities. So I just want to make sure to repeat this after additional context. I really do think that beauty and anything that could be associated in that way can recharge your soul. Somehow your soul gains additional life force energy. It's not perfect, and you can't become immortal. But I think that this is what was going on with Dr. Hiruluk. I think that Roger utilized this, and it's entirely possible for Luffy to utilize this in the future. Or maybe he has already been utilizing it throughout the story. But I do feel like this is appropriate to bring up now, because I see potential parallels between Drum Island and the current arc Elbaf. Something that I've said entirely too many times over the course of my channel is that the Dressrosa arcs and the Alabasta arcs are related. Like Oda took the same core idea and then placed the events of those arcs on different timelines of that idea. In Alabasta, the Strats arrived in time to stop a warlord from his scheme to overthrow the rightful king and acquire a weapon which would give him great power in the world. In Dressrosa, a very similar thing occurred, except for the Strats arrived many years after this had already happened. In the same sort of way, I think that the story of Drum Island and its sick heart was something that predated the Strats' arrival. Remember, when we're talking about a sick heart, we're talking about a sick soul. Heart and soul is synonymous. So in a way, you can think of each island having a soul, which obviously includes the souls of the people that reside there. And I think that if you had to describe Drum Island's soul, it has a lot to do, or at least something to do, with medicine. That was what that country was known for, at least before Wapol. Or phrased in a different way, Wapol took Drum Island's personality well before the Strats arrived, which is why Dr. Hiruluk had spent years on his cure for Drum Island. So I think that what we are witnessing right now in Elbaf is pretty much what happened to Drum Island, except for the Strats are here as it is happening. Emu and the Gods Knights are attempting to destroy Elbaf's soul. I even think that we're going to get a very similar visual to the end of Drum Island. Guys, sakura petals or blossoms falling from a tree. You know, if you want to think of it this way, it could look a lot like little tiny embers. We've already gotten plenty of foreshadowing that Elbaf's weakness is fire. I do think that Treasure Tree Atom will burn. It's kind of a sinister inversion, but I do think that this is a potential parallel. We've also already pointed out that the drums of Drum Kingdom look a lot like chopped down trees, but long frozen over. So I'm actually not entirely sure of what I'm trying to say in this section, but I do think that this is something worthy of keeping in mind. Elbaf, like Drum Island, has a soul, and obviously the Strats will probably end up protecting it. But Oda is a pretty creative guy, so you can never be entirely sure in what way. As of right now, it already looks like Elbaf's history and knowledge will be destroyed. It is already on fire, and I do think that the tree burns down, which would be a fitting thing to happen because all of this is also related to Ohara. At the very least, the threat of it will be very real. But perhaps we can take what we've learned from Brook and apply it. I kind of like this thought because as of right now, again, it seems like Brook is kind of important to this arc. Brook's body died. His soul left his body, but eventually it found its way back and potentially reattached somewhere else. So in my mind, Treasure Tree Atom is the body, and their culture and their history and their knowledge is something like its beating heart, but perhaps the same as Brook, the island of Elbaf and the people that reside there don't need that heart as much as you might think. Their soul can continue on without it. So anyway, one final thought. We've now discussed one way in which you could potentially help heal the heart: beauty and serenity. But this most of the time is not possible. So another way I think is more relevant. We said that there are two ways that you could die. Your soul could run out of energy or life force. Essentially, you would die of old age. Or your physical body could die, leaving life force left unused. Well guys, I think that some people are capable of using this leftover life force to literally heal their bodies, or metaphorically restart their hearts. And one of these people is Luffy. Honestly, I think that Luffy has been doing this or something similar to this from the very start. And I just wonder whether or not Luffy's ability to do this has something to do with consuming the Gomu Gomu no Mi, or the Nika fruit. In my opinion, it should be pretty obvious right now that the Nika fruit has powers relating to the soul. And I think that through Nika, you can really see what the soul is truly capable of. I think that most people think that, oh, the ability to bend reality, that is the power of the Nika fruit. But I truly think that that is a power of the soul. I think that if you had a 1,000-year-old sage with unlimited life force, they could potentially do something similar. But the unlimited life force aspect of this is important because just the same as we see when Luffy goes Gear 5th and use those powers, right, it costs an absurd amount of energy. Afterwards, he turns old. I guess something that just comes to mind for me is Portgas de Rouge. How was she able to hide her pregnancy and Ace for so long? It's almost as if she was bending reality, and I think that the effort took her life. And ultimately, I think that this is going to interrelate with the explanation of Devil Fruit. I think that Devil Fruit are a One Piece world science, but kind of like how we were talking about with Chopper, Dr. Kureha, and Dr. Hiroluk, the One Piece world mixes science and spirituality. Together, those make truth. So you view the power of Devil Fruits as magical when they're not. I kind of think that a better explanation is the collective soul of humanity has dreamed reality-changing fruits into existence. You can also think about this in terms of consciousness, or collective consciousness, bringing devil fruits into existence, linked to the energy of our collective souls. Essentially, if your will is infinite and your energy is infinite, you can do anything. This is not a power exclusive to Nico. It's the greatest power of humanity, if we put our souls into it. But yeah, I think that a pure depiction of the soul is something like a flame. And yes, you should absolutely be thinking about Sanji and all of Oda's clues about Sanji's power being derived from his heart. This is why the Mother Flame and the Eternal Flame are flames, and why we know that the power source for Emmet in the past was the Eternal Flame, and what powered him up in Egghead was Nika's heartbeat. So anyway, what I'm trying to say is that Luffy's Devil Fruit is soul adjacent. And we've known since essentially day one that Luffy is a very fast healer. I honestly think that Oda emphasized this in the pre-time skip by comparing Zoro and Luffy. Zoro's wounds throughout the pre-time skip lingered. Of course, we understand that Zoro was able to fight despite them, but it absolutely affected him for the entirety of the pre-time skip. But with Zoro, the possibility constantly exists of reopening old wounds. And this same thing basically wasn't the case with Luffy. And we all kind of just shrugged it off because he's a weird rubber man. So his body just works differently. But I really think that his Devil Fruit, even unawakened, gave him some kind of innate ability to convert his life force into healing. The fight here which really comes to mind is Luffy versus Lucci in Enies Lobby. I really think that this is why Luffy was able to surpass his body's limits. He could directly sacrifice his lifespan for enough healing to get back up. And I think that when Luffy awakened his Devil Fruit, this ability leveled up. I'm gonna be honest, guys, I think that right now in the story, Luffy is pseudo-immortal. He can restart his own heart even after he's died. But I say pseudo-immortal because I do think that Luffy is limited by the power or energy of his own soul, and potentially the power of the soul of the Devil Fruit within him. Because of his fruit, he's potentially a really bad example. Luffy is one of one. But typically, or most straightforwardly, I think that this kind of power costs lifespan, and you should eventually run out. But I guess what I'm saying is I think that it's something like this that is going to allow Luffy to carry on until the end of the story. And also why he should die of old age by 20. His soul is an energy resource that he can directly utilize, and he can burn it away. More so, I think, than anybody else. But I do think that if your will is great enough, regular people could do this as well, even without the Nika fruit. So I'm wondering out loud about Goldie Roger. Or an even better example might be Odin as he was boiling. The long story short is that the people in the world of One Piece can legitimately do things that you would not believe. But anyway, guys, there's more that I could potentially say, but I think that you get the idea. We didn't bring up Vivre cards, how Vivre cards are attached to someone's life force and how when someone dies, they literally burn away. But you can probably see how this is related. Another thing that we didn't talk about is Kuma and pain. I think that some people might use this as an example that Luffy was sustaining damage in the pre-time skip and maybe wasn't healing, because Kuma pushed out a lot of pain, and afterwards Luffy did feel better. But yeah, although I think that pain is an important concept in the story, it is not a can of worms that I want to open right now, at least not in full. I personally think that Oda is using pain in a very Buddhist way. It's not just about physical discomfort. It is related to all forms of suffering. But yeah, I'll leave this for you guys to think about on your own. But as always, I'm curious as to what you guys think. Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. If you're interested, check out my book, The Booms. Link is in the description. Like the video, subscribe, click the bell to be notified, join the squad, and as always, guys, have a wonderful day.